I've always come into rooms with a force, and I've always been the kind of person who doesn't take no for an answer if there's an injustice to be dealt with. I think a lot of people hear the word deafblind and they assume that I'm going to be quiet. And I am loud, I am snarky, I'm sarcastic, I talk a lot. Those are things that I think surprise people. I am Dame Elsa of the Order of the Bat. I am a knight errant against ableism. I wear vintage dresses and I deal with the problems as they come. I am a deafblind speculative fiction writer, a memoirist, a fencer, a swing dancer, a hiker. There's a misconception that people have that blind people aren't body conscious or aware of where they are in space. There's a concept called deaf gain, and it's the idea that deaf people don't just have a loss, there's also a gain to being deaf because you have that laser sharp focus. There are no two deafblind people that are exactly alike. The spectrum is so vast that I can't even really explain it. I remember my coach looking at me as I took out my hearing aid and put my glasses down, and I looked at him and he was like, "You realize you're better than everybody else on this team right now." I had the ability to just focus on being in the water and swimming. I ski better downhill without my hearing aids in because I stopped processing the world through my ears and I process the world through my feet. When I'm fencing, I process through my sword. I don't necessarily process through my eyes. I only need one touch point, whether it's my cane on the ground, even for an instant, or my sword in the air connecting with yours. And from that point, I can basically model my whole world off of that body awareness. I'm pretty sure they're going to try and take advantage of my blind side, so I move my arm out, block with a parry. And what I know is that their sword just connected really hard with my sword. 9 years old, I was going to a French camp in the San Juan Islands. I remember getting to pick up the sword for the first time, and I remember that it was a cool summer breeze and that I could see the pine trees and the sun, and I could smell the ocean, and I got to fence. I got to be a knight. Nobody had ever told me I couldn't, but also nobody had ever told me that I could. It was a complex upbringing. My parents were told that they should put me in an institution and have another baby after I was born by my pediatrician. And I heard that story, and I remember sort of thinking about how awful that seemed. My parents responded to the concept of institutionalizing me with a no, because they really wanted a kid. And I don't think that they had planned to have another one. So I have a lot of empathy for my parents. But I also feel like there was a certain degree of hiding my disability that happened. When you're being raised by queer parents who were living with the reality of the AIDS crisis, my father had AIDS. I think he knew that he had an illness he was disabled by. There were a lot of things to hide because society told us to. My father taught me how to be an advocate for disabled people and queer people everywhere. I've been writing about the topic of sort of disability representation and media for 10 years. And at a certain point, you have enough material that you need to write a book because you've written too many essays. I woke up one morning and there was an email from Marvel in my inbox. Here's an email that says, "Want to write for Marvel, the Women Anthology?" And I said yes, because that's what you do when you're a comic book nerd and an email from Marvel lands in your inbox. This is Women of Marvel #1, which I was lucky enough to be a part of. And I got to write Peggy Carter, which was pretty cool. They made a disabled woman look competent and awesome, and they didn't for 1 second make her disability about fetishization. And I felt like the artist really got what I was asking for. I went to the comic book store to buy my own copy, and I walked in and I was like, "Do you have Women of Marvel #1? And they were like, "Yes, we do." And I picked it up and I was like, "Yeah, so I wrote this." And the comic book nerds were very excited. And then there's Disabled People Destroy Science Fiction, which I co-edited with Dominique Parisien. And this won the Hugo Award in 2019. I'm working on a novel that is about what happens when, in the future, we have companies that own biotech. And so it's about the disabled hackers who are trying to stop the erasure of disability from the future world. It's important to me to work in the genre because I want there to be disabled people in the future. I want us to imagine disabled people in the future. I want to be in the future. When I was much younger, there was a picture book about Helen Keller that we read in my elementary school. And then we watched The Miracle Worker when I was in high school. When I was a kid, the representation that I got was she learned how to speak by standing next to a water pump by her teacher. And that was kind of it. And if you're a deafblind kid who's oral, who speaks a mile a minute, you're not going to resonate with that. We only ever hear the story up until she signs water at the water pump. And then we forget that she was also a socialist, that she performed on vaudeville circuits. Like, this was a completely different person, but we choose as a society not to look at her as an adult. There is a burning fire in my chest every single day. And it has been there since I was a little girl. And I think that that rage comes from existing in a world that wants to define me, constantly, based on their own decisions of who I should be. Sometimes I'll be on Twitter minding my business, and somebody will roll along and say, "You're using a sighted Twitter client, you're not really blind." And then I will get really angry, because nobody gets to tell me who I am. Perspectives of disabled people need to be seen. Being seen is important, and being a part of society is important. I hope people don't forget that. They don't need a degree in disability studies. They don't need to be disabled. They just need to be willing to listen. Every single piece of work I do is about forcing my way through the door.